Lynchburg is a city that values its history. That's why we have 7 historic districts, the shortest of which is right here on Pierce Street. It's only 2 blocks long. It's not known for the architecture, but for the people who lived here. There's a brand new brochure put out by Discover Lynchburg that tells us all about it.
Pierce Street was first settled in the 1850s. During the Civil War, the area was the site of the Confederate Camp Davis, which served as a military hospital, as well as a gathering point for recruits from the state of Virginia. During Reconstruction, the abandoned barracks were converted to housing for federal soldiers, a freedmen's school, and a black Methodist church. The area was annexed into Lynchburg in 1870. By the 1880s, Pierce Street included one of the first African-American grocery stores and a community center, and was rapidly becoming a center of activity in the community. William J. Calloway purchased Camp Davis land in 1877 from William and Fannie Ford and built a neighborhood general store with living quarters upstairs for his wife, Rebecca, and himself. The owners of the store and occupants of the upstairs apartments have evolved through the ensuing 150 years. One of the most notable occupants was Odo Benga, who lived there about 1910. He was a pygmy brought against his will to the United States and exhibited in a dehumanizing human zoo in both St. Louis and New York. He was later relocated to the safety and security of the Virginia Theological Seminary and College in Lynchburg. There he was tutored by poetess Anne Spencer and played with the Spencer children. His sadness over being separated from his own family in the Congo eventually overcame him, and he took his life. Built by William J. Calloway and originally known as Calloway Hall, located at 1309 Pierce Street, this was a gathering place for community and outside market, where farmers came to sell their produce and eggs. At one point, Calloway altered the building to provide living quarters, and in the early 20th century, the building was renovated as a church. The first congregation to occupy the building was Peaceful Baptist Church, and later the still active Wayside Gospel Temple Church of God took ownership. Clarence Dixie lived at 1300 Pierce Street from 1951 to 1982. He was the principal of Dunbar High School for nearly 30 years. He created a program that demanded excellence and equality in the then segregated high school. His steady hand also guided Dunbar through the first years of desegregation. Dunbar High School was the academic and cultural center of the African American community in Lynchburg through much of the 20th century. After retiring from the city schools in 1968, he joined the faculty of Lynchburg College and served 2 terms as Lynchburg's first modern-day African American city council member and the first African American vice mayor. Chauncey Edward Spencer Sr. retired to this home located at 1306 Pierce Street in 1977. He lived across the street from where he was born. He was the 3rd child of the poet Anne Spencer and her husband, Edward. Spencer was an amateur aviator. In 1939, he made a historic flight with Dale White from Chicago to Washington, D.C. to lobby Congress on behalf of African American flyers. This flight resulted in bills providing for flight training for African Americans and their admission as pilots in the Army Air Corps in World War II. He was a founding member of the National Airmen's Association of America, which later became known as the Tuskegee Airmen. In 1948, he received the Exceptional Civilian Service Award, the highest award given to a civilian, for his service in World War II. His flight suit is included in the Black Wings exhibit at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. The home is now a Virginia Historic Landmark. Located at 1313 Pierce Street is the Anne Spencer House and Garden Museum. Built in 1903 by Edward Spencer for his wife and their growing family, this modified Queen Anne-style home is a Virginia Historic Landmark and on the National Register of Historic Places. It is now a museum and is furnished almost entirely with the Spencer's belongings. Most are pre-World War II vintage and some are Victorian. Edward Spencer was the first African American parcel postman in Lynchburg from 1912 to 1924. He was also a talented businessman who ran a chicken business. He was a notary, a real estate developer, chauffeur, and a creative collector of cast-off building materials. These materials he reused to great advantage in the home, as well as in building the garden and garden cottage Eden Crawl, which were located behind the home. His wife Anne was a mother of three, the first librarian at Dunbar High School for 22 years, was a poet, a gardener, a civil rights activist, and a friend and hostess to many notables. Anne Spencer was a lyric poet of the Harlem Renaissance period of the 1920s. She was the first Virginian and second African American to be included in the Norton Anthology of Modern Poetry. Over 30 of her poems were published during her lifetime, but all were written for her own pleasure, usually on biblical or mythological themes, or on nature as reflected in her beloved garden. The charming garden cottage and the long, narrow garden behind the Spencer home were Anne's retreat and source of inspiration. The sophisticated garden design evolved through the years, and in 1983 and again in 2008 was lovingly restored to its 1937 appearance by the Hillside Garden Club, who continues its routine maintenance today. The Pierce Street Market was a traditional neighborhood grocery store since its construction in 1903 until it ceased operation in 1994. It was a well-known community landmark which operated under a variety of names, including Simmons Cash Store, Pierce Street Grocery, Rosser's Market, and for 1 year in 1977, the Lickety Split Market. Rebuilding Community, whose business is the preservation and economically viable renovation of historic houses, has restored the exterior of the building to its original appearance. The interior has been reconfigured into 2 spacious apartments on each floor, combining modern conveniences with refurbished architectural features. A Virginia Historic Landmark on the National Register of Historic Places, this home at 1422 Pierce Street is the home of 2 important Virginians, Professor Frank Trigg and Robert Walter Whirlwind Johnson, M.D. Professor Trigg was born into slavery in the governor's mansion in Richmond, Virginia, while his parents were personal servants of Governor John B. Floyd. At the age of 14, he lost his arm in a threshing machine accident, which made working on a farm unsuitable. When the Civil War ended, he enrolled in Hampton Institute, where he became a close friend of Booker T. Washington. In 1880, Trigg and his wife Ellen moved to Lynchburg, where he taught for 22 years. He served as principal of the Polk Street and Payne Elementary Schools and of the Jackson Street High School. Then he was named the first African American supervisor of black students in the Lynchburg public school system. He also co-founded the All-Black Virginia Teachers Association. Robert Walter Johnson was a physician, avid tennis player, and coach. From 1933, he spent most of his professional career at his home on Pierce Street, where he built a clay tennis court and founded the Junior Development Program with the support from the American Tennis Association. He recruited and hosted promising African American youth, many of whom lived in his home, and practiced and trained every day during the summer. Among them were the Wimbledon champions Althea Gibson and Arthur Ashe. Many of the players he coached went on to college, with some receiving financial help from Dr. Johnson. He is credited with integrating tennis, but his most enduring legacy is instilling the highest standards of sportsmanship in the play of his students. In 2009, Dr. Johnson was inducted into the International Tennis Hall of Fame.